All right, how's everybody doing? Having a good conference? I think it's doing great. I think these guys have done a great job. And I knew, I think a year ago when you guys asked us, I was like, this is going to be a good conference. Just from the first email, they treated me like an adult, which is odd. That doesn't happen very much for me. So, hi, I'm Rob, as Joe mentioned, and I welcome you to my talk, 30-minute dissection of the Star Wars trailer. Now's probably a good time to point out if I say something that offends you or disturbs you or makes you angry, please feel free to send me email. It will give me the pleasure of just trashing it. Now, we're going to talk a little serious today. In fact, this is a little different talk for me. Usually I'm like big, philosophical, fun-loving, and today I get to talk about the exciting world of finance. But really, this conference is about making your business better, improving your business. And Joe, for some reason, thinks that I know something about that, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I had some motivation for getting into this, trying to like hype up and be like, what do I want to talk about? And what are some of the issues I want to address? And there's really two kind of phrases, memes, quotes, things that you hear at conferences that I want to discuss. And the first one is that it's just too hard for indies to make money on the App Store. And this really drives me crazy when I hear this. It drives me crazy because it's discouraging. We should be excited. I remember my first app that I put on the store or tried to put on the store for like a year, but it was really exciting in the beginning. And I think where it really comes from is people associate an identity with being an indie app developer, and it looks something like this. You're a garage band and you're playing like the high school prom and you're really working hard and you're super creative and you're just putting all your effort into this and you just quite can't make it. And that makes you a little bitter. Here's a better image of what I think indie app developers are to everybody else who isn't an indie app developer. This woman is called a demonstrator. She's a licensed demonstrator for a company called Stampin' Up. They're a company in the Midwest, and tell me if you've heard this, she pays a yearly fee to be a licensed app demonstrator to the Stampin' Up Corporation, and then in turn also pays money to purchase product from them that she then goes to conferences and redistributes and sells and things like that. And you may think, that doesn't sound like us at all, but imagine for a moment you're a weather app developer. You pay Apple $100 a year licensing fee to sell apps, and then you pay the weather company monthly, yearly, daily, weekly, however you set it up, to redistribute their data. All you're really doing is putting a presentation around it. If you think about it, that's what this woman does. And some people, I've kind of floated this metaphor out with some people, and they're like, no, that's not true. Might be impossible. And it's like, no, if you search your feelings, you know it to be true. If you really think about it, you can't get away from it. So what I would say is that it's not that it's too hard for indies to make money on the App Store. Let's just fix that. It is hard for indies to make money. Mike Curley came up last night and talked about it, how hard it was, how much time he spent on it. Time is something we're going to talk about a lot today. People think it just happens. They think it just happens overnight or happens over 6 months. If I do what the people I see doing right now that are making money, if I do exactly what they do, I should make money too. And that's not how it works. Because that person who's now established in making money, there was a period of time, in a lot of cases, a long period of time where that wasn't the case. And they kept plodding along and they kept plugging along and they kept plodding along. A lot of people say, well, all right, you started Martian in 2009, which is true. I started my first company selling Mac software, remember that thing? Remember people that do that, in 2004. So it was 5 years before I launched the company that eventually would allow me to go indie 2 years after I launched that. It was about a year after I launched that, in 2010. It's a lot of work. It's really hard, but it's not too hard. And it's not just about the App Store. And we can learn a lot from other businesses, like Mike said last night. Here's the second thing that drives me crazy. People don't value software. We've all heard this, right? Let's talk about coffee. People will pay $5 to $10 for a cup of coffee, but they won't pay for my app. Bullshit. People don't value software? No. People value what they can see. Let's deconstruct that cup of coffee that someone's paying $5 to $10 for. And it looks something like this. Look at this guy. This guy is a chemistry set. I don't even understand this. I would never spend 20 to 25 minutes on a cup of coffee. There are some people who will, crazy people, but most people are like, I don't want to spend 25 minutes on a cup of coffee, so I will go and pay for the convenience of watching this guy. People are not paying $5 to $10 for a latte. They are paying $5 to $10 for coffee theater to watch this guy make their coffee. They see it. Look how much he cares. Look at all the equipment he's doing. Look how hard it is. What would our customers see if they saw us building apps? What would that look like? Would they pay money to see that? They might pay money not to see that. The other problem we have is that marketing strategies that we're looking at, we're all like, how do you market your app? What do you do? And they look at other businesses. Classic marketing theory is built around this. Products that sit on a shelf. And you need to distinguish yourself so someone can walk in to a grocery store and just look at all the apps and be like, that one, no, not that one, no, that one, no. That's the one I want. The one with the colorful wrapper that's green, because green's my favorite color. And this is where someone says, well, that's the App Store's fault. The App Store makes it really hard. Search is hard. Well, guess what? Those problems are hard, and that's not going to change. Software is hard. Trying to get people to understand software is hard. Do you know what the rest of the world looks like when they give money to an app developer? Looks like this. For all they care, they're putting money into a bucket, and they are hopeful that something good will be done with that money. That's what they look at. Why do you think so many current app developers, the vogue thing is the patronage model? There's another name for the patronage model. It's called begging. It's saying, oh my gosh, I deserve to make a living. Please, please, please give me money. Because if you don't give me money, I won't be able to make software. I'm sorry, you're a whiner and you're a beggar. You need to build a product that's compelling for people. If you build a compelling product, you won't have to ask for money. People will line up. Chris Rock used to talk about this. Hey, a marijuana salesman doesn't go door to door like an encyclopedia salesman. He doesn't have to. He's selling marijuana. If you have a compelling product, you don't have to worry about it. And the reality is there is no silver bullet. Marketing is not going to save you. Pricing strategies are not going to save you. That is not what's keeping you from a compelling business. It's the fundamentals. And that's what we need to talk about. And what I'm going to talk about today is not a solution. I'm not going to say this is the penultimate way to be successful in business. I think too many people are offering solutions and not enough people are offering toolkits. We're developers after all. Where's the SDK for my business? That's what I'm hoping to talk about today, because I want you to be able to make decisions for yourself. I want you to be able to analyze your business and look at it and make decisions. Not a bad idea, right? So I thought, all right, who is a group of people that are really good at making decisions? And I was like, I got it. Okay, fighter pilots, right? Not Hollywood actors. Maybe Hollywood actors. No, fighter pilots. So there's this guy, John Boyd. And Dan Pasco, if he's here, he may not be, but if he's here, he's smiling because we talked about this 4 years ago. And he told me about John Boyd. He said, you need to go look up John Boyd. He has this decision cycle that he calls that fighter pilots use to make decisions. And it looks like this. You observe your environment, you then orient yourself to the environment, you make a decision, and then you take action on that decision. Now that's interesting. Most people say you make a decision, that's the action, right? No. You make a decision and then you act. You think about the decision before you act. Now imagine the environment that fighter pilots have to act in. This is a very quick decision process. Something that's almost ingrained in them in second nature. So when we're talking about the process I discussed today, this isn't something you should spend a lot of time thinking about. And successful people do not think about this. It is second nature to them. It's how they run business. It's how they think about business. Now, the first steps of this process are, I think, key for us because so many people want to switch right to the decision. They just want to look at it and say, this is what I'm going to do, gut instinct, and just go. And what they don't do is they don't collect data about what's around them. They don't look for things that they can measure. And businesses are infinitely measurable. They are infinitely measurable. There's a whole thing of the science of business, the engineering approach to business. These things exist because it's measurable. The second thing is people don't analyze what they're looking at according to their mental model. Someone else's pricing scheme is not going to work for me unless I'm selling their product the way that they want to sell their product. It needs to be personal. And that's why I'm not offering a solution, is that you need to go and figure this stuff out. Now, I looked at this and I said, all right, fighter pilots, my audience, I don't know, they're used to being called ninjas and rock stars. Fighter pilots is a little bit of a stretch, and we don't really understand a lot about fighter pilots' lifestyle. But then I looked at this some more and I thought about it and I was like, I got it. I got it. This looks like something that will be familiar to almost everybody in the room. Science, bitches. Observation, analysis, hypothesis. And then you test and validate. And I think it's more interesting to look at this in the scientific method, because when you say make a decision, a lot of us think that is the end state, when really we're hypothesizing something that we think is going to work. And if you make a decision and think, I'm done, and you don't look at the effects of your decision in that testing and validation stage, then you don't even know if you're making boneheaded decisions. You're just throwing darts in the dark and hoping something hits. So we're going to science the shit out of our business. I tried to work in Mart Walkney. I really did. I was like, my name of my company's Martian Craft. I tried, but the bottom line is I'm not as handsome as Matt Damon. Okay. Think back to high school physics. The position of a rigid body in space is a function of its initial position, that's r0, its velocity as a function of time, and then its acceleration as a relationship of time squared over 2. Now, velocity, if you then took physics in college, or if you studied calculus-based physics in high school, you know that velocity is the first derivative of position. You use measurements of position to determine velocity. And then to determine acceleration, it is measurements of your velocity. And that's the relationship that we're going to talk about, and that's how we're going to break this up. So an interesting version of this equation says, well, you can predict the future. You can figure out where that object is going to be in space by just looking at its current position and then adding its velocity and its acceleration to it. Now, this assumes a lot of things like there's no friction and there's no resistance, and that it has a static or constant velocity and constant acceleration. But that doesn't matter for us because this is a metaphor. So let's start with cash flow, our position. A lot of people refer to cash flow as their cash position in their company. So I think it was like, this metaphor really goes deep. So what is the purpose of any business? Nobody's going to like my answer, but everybody should understand it. The purpose of any business is to make money. Now, high-minded people are going to say, that's bullshit. I'm in it for creative reasons. I'm in that. Yeah, that's great. There's a reason you're not doing it at night as a hobby, and you're trying to do it every day and put food on your table. And that's because you're trying to make money. That is the business part of this. Separate your business from your craft. We're talking about your business. And if you want to take your craft and make it into a business, then the purpose of that business has to be to make money. That is not crass. That doesn't mean you're selling out. That doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're smart, and in 3 years, you're going to still be working on your business instead of working for me or Dan Pasco. All right. So we're going to start with cash flow. What is cash flow? Cash flow gives you a picture of your current position. It's the state of operations. You wake up in the morning, how's my business doing? You analyze your cash flow. And it is a function of your expenses and revenue. This is not rocket science. You got money going out the door, you got money coming in the door, you want to subtract one from the other and it be a positive number. If it's a negative number, you're in trouble. If it's a positive number, you're all right. But more importantly, what it tells us, and this is, again, we're going to get into some of the business science of this, is what is the cost of your revenue? So if you think of your revenue as a product that you're receiving, something that's coming in the door, how much money does it cost you to make money? You got to spend money to make money. Well, your cash flow is supposed to tell you how much money you're spending to bring that money in the door. So, okay, how do we measure cash flow? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to determine our billing cycle. And I can't avoid this. This is the worst part of this talk, but I got to say it. All right, how many people have heard the term net 30, right? Everybody should, right? If you're an app store developer, you get your money net 30, which means, well, I'm going to explain it. If you're a contracting agent and the terms are net 30, it means you get paid 30 days after you invoice. And most people understand that. So let's go through an example with contracting because the timing is a little more straightforward. A product, as we'll see, can be a little more tricky. So you have an example contract. You're going to get paid $20,000 a month. For all you podcasters in there, that's pretty good money, but not great money. We can make more if we want. Terms net 30. So what does that mean? So that means if I start work in October, at the end of October, the 1st of November, I get to invoice them. Hooray, invoice, I'm getting paid, right? Nope, net 30. You will get paid 30 days after you invoice. Hooray. Oh, slow transition there. Wow, look at this, rookie. All right, it showed up that time. Okay, so what confuses some people, and I go through this, I have a contracting agency, we have people start to work for us, and they think, hey, I start working, and 30 days later I get paid, and it's like, well, that's not exactly how it works. They get paid a little differently, but we're burying the lead here. But the reality is if you start work October 1, you're not going to see any money for that work until December 1st. That's the same, a sale that you have in the App Store on October 1st, you won't see that money until December 1st, along with the money for October 2nd, 3rd, 4th, all the way to the end of October. Okay, not so bad. So billing cycle. Now, we have two methods that we can use to analyze it. We can have cash-based analysis of our cash flow, and we have accrual-based analysis of our cash flow. So we need to add a wrinkle to this, though, to have this make sense. We need to add the interesting part in this. So let's say in addition to that $20,000 a month, you have $10,000 a month in payroll expense. If you're an indie, this could be your salary. You're taking a salary, right? Indies, we take a salary from our business. We don't wait for profits at the end. That's a really bad idea. You'll lose your house. So you have your payroll expense. So let's go back to this, and now let's add the expense part into it. And it says, oh, wait a minute, there are more bumps in this scale now. That's right. That's because in 30 states in the US, you cannot run payroll monthly. You have to run payroll at least twice a month or every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks is insane. People that do this, I don't understand them. I like round numbers, so we do twice a month for payroll. So that means, whoa, wait a minute. Before I see a dime of money for this contract, I have to pay my staff, or myself in this case, 3 times. That's a payroll problem, right? Oh, we're not thinking about that. So the payroll problem is basically you get paid on December 1st, but you have to start paying money out on October 15th. This is why there are big consulting companies and there aren't a lot of small consulting companies. It's actually really hard to solve this basic problem. But the reality is that collection is behind. Collection meaning you sent the invoice out and someone actually paid you. What I actually showed you in contracting is the ideal case. You have these crazy customers that are like, yeah, see, I told you I was going to pay you 30 days afterwards, but my funding hasn't come in yet, and this is really bad, and I need you to extend that 60 days. Okay, sure, yeah, whatever. Right. So cash accounting. What cash accounting basically does is it recognizes this reality. It's basically based on what you collect. What is the money that is coming in? It's your checkbook. And everybody who has a checkbook, you balance your checkbook, right? I don't, but you should. Okay, if you balance your checkbook, this is basically what cash-based accounting looks like. So, October 1, I have $0. I start work. November, ooh, I'm in the hole, $5,000 because I had to pay that payroll ahead of when I collected. Well, and the hits keep on coming. By December, I'm now still $5,000 in the hole. Now, this is net. This isn't $5,000 per month. I'm saying total on the contract, you're still in the hole $5,000. Okay, so I've been in business for 2 months and I'm short $5,000. I'm probably not very good at this, right? But then you go back to it and you're like, wait a minute, but it sounded so good. I had this $20,000 contract. I had $10,000 in expenses. I should have $10,000, right? According to cash-based analysis, you don't. Now, the good news is that eventually in January, you'll catch up and you'll be ahead $5,000. And then every month after that you execute this, you'll be ahead $10,000. You're like, wait a minute, that still doesn't seem right. But eventually that contract will end, and in theory, you shouldn't have that payroll expense. Unless you have employees, and then you've got other problems, you need another contract. But it eventually rectifies itself, so it's not all bad news. In fact, the reality is that it is good. You did sign a good contract. What we need is not a cash-based accounting of this, because cash-based accounting lies. Even though it is the reality of what's the actual money it is, it's a lie. And that may not make sense, but hopefully by the end of this, I could show you that accrual-based accounting is the way you want to go. Accrual-based accounting is more difficult because you can't just look at your bank account and rectify that. You have to keep separate books because accrual-based accounting is based on what you invoice and also what you were invoiced. So when I invoice the customer, I count that income. I say, all right, I've received that income, and when my employees invoice me or when I have payroll, then I recognize that expense immediately, even though I have 15 days to pay them. Most payroll, if you're doing twice a month, it's net 15. So let's look at this diagram again. So again, October, I start with $0. I go into November, hey, I've got $10,000, hooray, I'm great at business. But in fact, this is exactly what you expected. This is why accrual accounting is so good, because it just makes sense, right? $20,000, $30,000, I'm doing great. I'm awesome at business. I just need to grow like crazy, right? So it's easier to understand accrual analysis, and this is why it is used by every business on the planet. The only businesses I know that do cash-based accounting, solely cash-based accounting, are small independent companies because they're like, I can't figure this out. So accrual accounting, write it in your notebook, look it up afterwards. There's a lot of theory that I'm not going into, but the basic reality is when you invoice, you count the money. It makes it really difficult at the end of the year. I'm not gonna lie, the end of the year can get tricky because you will invoice, but won't receive the money until the next year, and you gotta pay taxes on that money. And that kind of seems like it stinks, but it's worth it in the end. So the biggest thing about accrual analysis and why it's so important is go back to the original idea of cash flow. The idea of cash flow is that I wanna see how much money am I spending to earn money. And accrual analysis is a direct relationship from that cost per dollar earned. You could see month to month, I spent this amount of money, I earned this amount of money. It also is timely information. You'll notice collection was delayed. And so it's harder to think about leverage. It's harder to look at your workforce and say, well, I'm paying that person $10,000 a month. How much money are they making me? Again, that may sound crass. If you're in business, that's the way you've got to look at employees, at least on some level, like twice a month or something. You just look at them and say, what are they doing for me? What kind of money are they making me? So before we wrap up on cash flow, there's two reports that you need to look at. You need to look at them every month. You need to look at them every quarter. You need to look at them every year. Some people look weekly. If you're an app store developer, you get paid once a month from Apple. There's really nothing you could do weekly. We will talk about some weekly analysis in the next section. But every month you should look at this, and you should look at your profit and loss. And your profit and loss is based on your accrual-based analysis. It's just simply put, what did I invoice against what I was billed for that, and you look at that, and hence the catchy name, P&L, or profit and loss, it will be referred to as P&L. The second one you want to look at is the balance sheet, and this is where you're going to see your cash analysis of your company. And your balance sheet basically says, okay, this is all the money I'm owed, and this is all the money I was able to collect, and this is all the money that I owe. And so again, it's a cash-based analysis. It will look very different from your P&L. The good news is investors, they look at your P&L. Sometimes they will look at your balance sheet if they're doing a full purchase of your company. If they're doing an asset purchase, they just care about your P&L, which again, we're going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, so cash flow. It's the basis of everything else we're going to say. I'm going to use the word cash flow 100 more times in this talk, but it's important to understand this is your pulse of your company. So now let's talk about growth. Now, another ugly maxim that you see in business that just unfortunately is true. If you are not growing, you are shrinking. And the reality for this is your expenses are always going up. Your expenses are like oxygen. Once you start a person on oxygen, it is very hard for them to go off direct oxygen because their lungs just say, cool, I'm going to stop breathing for myself. Expenses are the same way for your business. Once you get used to spending more money, it is incredibly hard to spend less. And it's incredibly hard within one person running the business. Generally, you have to bring in an outside party who looks at your business and say, why are you spending all this money? And then they slash and cut and they're the bad guy. But it's very hard. Your expenses are always going up, which means if you are not growing your revenue, your profits are shrinking, i.e. your growth is shrinking. Okay, so how do we measure growth? They're basically deltas in our cash flow. Again, remember that velocity is a derivative of your position. Your growth is a derivative of your cash flow. So you just look month to month or week to week. And I use something, and I know a lot of people use something called look-back charts. And what's a look-back chart? So this is a look-back chart. I look at 4 months here, and I'm just looking at the relationship of my profit over time. And it will create a curve, or you can do these with static lines, but it'll create a curve and you can kind of see, okay, this is the pulse of my company. Revenue was down in August, it was up in September. Look back charts are important because you're looking back at the last 3 months generally. This one is a 4-month report. You can look back over the whole year. This is an example of a T12 chart, which looks every month at that relationship. Now, you can look at your profit, but you also should look at your expenses in this. A lot of people, when they talk about look back charts, only talk about revenue or profit. I think it's important to talk about expenses as well, because in this case, in October, they're in trouble because their expenses went through the roof. And you need to pay attention to that because, again, expenses are like oxygen. You spend too much, it's really hard to unwind that. So there's these relationships that you're going to look for in your look back charts. Again, these 3-month cycles, you're looking at a quarter at a time. And what this does is you don't have to look at a whole year. You don't have to look at year-over-year projections or anything like that. You're just looking at the last 3 months to figure out, how is my business doing? Now, if you're in business, this is the easiest chart to see. Great. Profits are up. Awesome. I'm going to take a vacation. The other one that's really easy to look at is this. The company's going the crapper. I got to let go of people. I've got to cut my costs at all costs. And when you're a contracting company, you cut your costs by letting people go. Now, letting people go is really tough, but when you're in this kind of backslide, it's them or the whole company. So it makes it a little easier to let people go or fire people when you're like, I have to make a decision that's going to either save the company or save this person's job. This is the one that will keep you up at night as a business owner. This is the one where you suit up and you're like, I really got to think about what I'm doing. When your profits go flat, you're in trouble because you need to start putting work in now to turn that into an upswing, or it's going to turn into a backslide. This is what should scare you. Upswings, downswings, they're easy decisions. You know what to do. Actually, growth is hard too, but not as hard as the plateau. This is why you analyze this, because you want to catch this as soon as possible. I'll give an example. I'm going to pick on Mike, because Mike showed his curve with Relay. And it was like, he's really proud of that curve. And he should be. There was a giant spike towards the end of that. You know what I saw when I looked at it? I saw it, oh, wow, looks like it's plateauing there at the end. I wonder what that next number is. Instinctually, I looked for that. You're looking for those dips. You're looking for those plateaus, because plateaus are tough. Because even if you have a huge spike in your revenue and you hit a plateau, you know what happens? Your expenses start creeping up because you're like, hey, I got money. I need a Corvette. I need a nice car. I'm going to fly first class. And all of a sudden, your expenses start creeping up with inside of that. So plateaus are really rough. But the reality is there's really going to be 2 patterns that you're going to see on a normal basis, because there's a lot of variation. The first you're going to see is a peak. And a peak basically says, hey, I got a really nice bump last month, and I don't know why, because I'm looking at September and it doesn't look like it's going to peak just the same. The other one that you see is a valley, and this one, kind of not the nice, warm, bubbly feeling that a peak gives you, but in the same sense, when the number picks back up the following month, you're like, okay, it was a valley. But these peaks and these valleys make it really hard to run a company. Now, one more thing that you could do if you really want to analyze this. So someone like Mike Hurley, who gets his sponsorship money probably on a weekly basis, I don't know, maybe monthly, I'm guessing. But if you collect on a weekly basis, you can also do weekly analysis of sales. I bill monthly. Most app developers, you're getting your money monthly, so you won't want to look at it. But a lot of people do look at the T52 charts just to analyze their sales on a week-to-week basis. So the troublemakers in those are these peaks and valleys. We got to figure out, what do you do in these peaks and valleys? Because it would be really nice when you first think about a plateau, you're like, well, it's constant. I know what my money is. That's great. If I know what my revenue is, I can estimate it and it never changes, and that's awesome. But the peaks and valleys are what you're going to see more often or not. So you need to know, what do you do when it peaks and what do you know when you hit the valleys? So the first thing you do is create a savings account. If you don't have a savings account as a business, you're in trouble. And I mean a separate account, not saying, well, I've got a part of my operating account that I just don't touch. Create a separate savings account and start putting money. So when you have those peaks, you take that extra revenue you're not spending and shove it in a savings account, because you're going to need it when a valley comes. And what you're going to notice is these things actually oscillate like sine waves. Your peaks and your valleys, the differential is pretty close to the same. The absolute values are the same. Ideally, in any savings account for any business, you want 3 to 6 months of operating cost. If you are well balanced with your personal finances, you probably have a savings account with 6 months of your liquid expenses in it, right? You're a business owner. Everybody's saying that. Yeah, we have savings accounts personally, right? Because the business can crash and burn tomorrow, we're in trouble. Well, you should have the same for the business, because now you're not dealing with your family that might go out, it's all the people that work for you's families, and that's more terrifying. So 3 to 6 months of operating costs, unless you're a big company. This is not practical for a large company. Why? The FDIC. It's simply put, you would need $100 million for some companies to have 6 months of operating costs. And that's not practical, right, Rob? Yeah, it's not practical at all. So there are other options. And the next option that a lot of people look to are lines of credit. And lines of credit are based on your cash flow. You can go to a bank and say, this is how much money my average revenue has been for the last 3 months. Hey, we've got these look back charts, right? So you already know what this money is. Or, my cash flow is really trending up and I just need a little bit of operating revenue to start that next contract. Remember, we start the contract and you've got to pay 3 payrolls before you receive money for it. A line of credit can fill in that gap for you. The trouble with lines of credit is they need to be secured. And so I got to say right here, you could lose your house. The first thing the bank's going to ask you if you own your home is they're going to say, sure, we'll give you a line of credit for however much money you want. Just sign the deed to your house right here. And if anything goes wrong and you can't pay it back, we'll just take your house instead, right? Bad idea. So we want to look at other ways to secure that. And there are a lot of collateral as a business that we can use. One is future receivables. So if I've got this big contract that I just signed, but it doesn't start for 2 months, I need money to get me through that. That's okay. Some banks will take that. Another thing that most banks will take is something called accrued revenue. Accrued revenue is a blessing and a curse. If you say accrued revenue to a contracting company, a chill will run down their spine. They'll be like, ooh, accrued revenue scares you. Now, accrued revenue is simply put, you've invoiced for that money and you haven't collected it. Someone said, yeah, I'm going to pay you that money and it's 60, 90, 120, 2 years late, and you have that on your balance sheet. Because that's money that you've already counted because we're using accrual, so you've already counted that as revenue, but it's just hanging out there. And most banks, when they see that, they consider that more secure than a future receivable. Because if you've already invoiced them, you can go to court and get that money. And if you have a loan with a bank and they want to get paid, they will help sue your client for you for that. So accrued revenue is something that seems terrible. It's like, this person promised to pay me, but they didn't pay me. But it's actually a blessing because you can go and secure a line of credit based upon that or get a loan from the bank. Notice in all of this, I didn't say go get investment money. A lot of people jump right to investment money, and nothing, I talk at one point about investment at the end, but by and large, you could just work with a good corporate bank and get these set up if your books are set up right. This is why cash flow is important, because you just present all this information to them, you show them your balance sheet, you show them your P&L, and they say, oh, okay, these guys are good, they're good for the money. So, accrued revenue is really a liability, but it's also a deferred asset. Oh, I used a big word there, or a little word actually, but a word that might be unfamiliar, asset. So it's a good time now to switch hands and talk about accelerants. That's the last part of the equation. And I'm going to take a breath because I feel like I'm going way too fast. Okay, accelerants. So we've talked about growth. I've talked about how to measure your growth. Wrong button. These represent the fundamentals. Your cash flow, your growth analysis, these are the fundamentals of running your business. These are things that you have to have dead cold. Behind every good business is one person or 2 people or 3 people that understand this stuff. I also want to point out here, you may be thinking, well, this is what I have an accountant for. Wrong. If you were a business owner, these are the basics that you need to know. This is stuff I can tell you from my 8 years of experience. I said, oh, I've got an accountant to take care of that for me. When in reality, I needed to be able to keep track of that. Your accountant just does the numbers and says, okay, they're going to read you the news. They're not going to give you analysis. They're not going to tell you what to do because they have liability insurance that could get them in trouble if they did. You need to make these decisions. And so in order to make these decisions, you need to understand what they're representing. But now, with the accelerants, we now get to play with the future. If you think back to that early equation that I showed, acceleration is heavily dependent upon time. So you want to be ginger with this. You don't want to put a lot of thought into this and overanalyze, or you'll just run your company into the ground before it even gets there. But with small adjustments and small tweaks and small simple movements, over time, this will solidify your company. And when I say solidify your company, you actually need to get out of the way of thinking, well, my revenue comes from my app sales. You want the value in your company, something that you could leverage to get loans or credit or things like that to keep your business going, is something more solid and more stable than your revenue, because your revenue can go up and it can go down. You essentially want to build assets. So to build your assets, the first thing you need to do is understand your margins. So in contracting, as you scale a contracting company, your margins, which is your profit on top of your revenue, or your revenue after expenses, settles in between 5 and 10%. This is not a hard number, but it seems to be where most large contracting companies go. And that's because as you scale your contracting company, your expenses linearly increase with that. Because you have to expand with people. You basically have to say, all right, if I'm going to charge more money for more products or more projects, I need to get more people in. And eventually those people start coming with overhead, HR departments, middle management, project managers, things like that, that cost money. And in some cases, to get good people can cost a lot of money. But products are exponential. Products, you can put a ton of money in and then just let it out into the world, and it could just make money while you're asleep, if all things go well. And it's exponential. There's no relationship between the amount of work you put into it to the amount of money it will make afterwards. Crappy products make a lot of money. Some great products make no money. It's a crapshoot, but it can be exponential in either direction. And in both contracting and products, the risk matches the reward. A lot of people tell me, they're like, oh, you're a contractor. I mean, that's the safe approach. And I laugh at them and say, I'll switch jobs with you. But the risk matches it. I don't take a lot of risk because someone's promising me to make money and I can hold them to that in court if need be, in exchange for me fronting just a little bit of money up front. When we first talked about the net 30 billing cycle, you may have thought, well, that's a lot of money up front. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not. If someone's going to give me $300,000 over a year, yeah, sure, I'll front them $15,000 to get that $300,000, especially if they'll pay it out over time. It's this annuity-based thinking that I want to talk about. The other thing we need to consider when we're considering whether you should do contracting or product is the opportunity cost. So you have your contracting business here, and your revenue, that looks good. Revenues are up. You actually had kind of a quadratic increase right in the middle there, before it kind of stabilized. But you're seeing good. If you draw a trend chart through this, it's good linear increase in revenue that you'll see with a contracting company. But now map product revenue next to that. And if you look at where I have the divider line in there, product revenue just goes through the roof. Because as your product gains momentum and you reach your market, more and more people can buy it without you having to put money into it. And that's the trick with products. You put money up front, but then afterwards you actually reduce the amount of money. Whereas in a contract, you have to put equal money from the beginning of the contract to the end, in most cases, to make the same amount of money. And this opportunity cost comes when these graphs collide and when they basically intersect and then product goes off into the stratosphere. And if you're to the left of this curve, you say, well, it was better for me to contract. If you're to the right of this curve, well, it was better for me to do product revenue. Now, all of this is in hindsight. So the trick in looking at these accelerants is figuring out, well, which way am I going to go? And my reality is don't choose, do both. Martian does both. Black Pixel does both. Yes, most of my business comes from contracting because there is a lot of money in it. And it's going to take us a long time to match that revenue with products. But by having that mix, what eventually we hope to happen is that instead of going and getting a line of credit to manage these peaks and valleys, our product revenue will establish that peak and valley. Right now, I don't even consider my product revenue. I throw it away. It's just kind of like bonus money at the end of the year, like, oh, okay, it was there. And I'm not talking about a minor amount of money, but to us, relatively, it is. If you have revenue of $6 or $7 million, $100,000 or $200,000 isn't a lot of money. Yet I talk to some of my friends who run their own business and they're like, that's half my revenue. So it's all a matter of relativity and looking at this, but you could use the product revenue in exchange with contracting. Now, if you're coming from the other side, if you're like, I've got a product and it's really close, I just want to pick up a few contracts, don't go out and start your own contracting business. Call Dan or call me or call someone who has a business that's going out and getting contracts. We're always looking for people. And I have no problem with saying, yeah, work half your time for me and work the other half of the time on your product. The reality is mix these up. Make both bets so that if one doesn't pay off, you still have a fail-safe. The last thing that I want to think about when we talk about accelerants is I want you guys to think about annuities. And this is something, he's here, he's talking later, Dave Smith, he's really good, and he's the master at this. In fact, I would say I learned this part of the business from watching him do his business. And the reality is you just have this layer cake. So the idea is you release a product out in the market, it starts making money. It's not making a lot of money, it's not enough that you can quit, but you're like, okay, this thing is just off there and it's making money. It's an annuity. I put that out there and it's an asset that, be it $50 a month or $1,000 a month or $100,000 a month, it's pretty stable. Once that, the spike comes down and you ramp off into the tail of these, you could just start stacking these up. And so it's like, I don't need to make an app that makes $10,000 a month. I could do it with 5 apps that make $2,000 a month. So there's 2 types that you could do. We talked about contracting, we talked about products. Contracting is a static annuity. The money doesn't change. It's pretty stable. You know upfront what you're getting, and you're gonna get that amount of money. And there's also this direct cost to revenue relationship. You have to put the time into it, or you have to pay someone to put the time into it to get that revenue back. If you stop the work, you stop the expense, you stop the revenue. It's money in, it's money out. Now, product revenue on the other end is this variable annuity. These are the exciting things, the lottery tickets. It says, I can put in a little bit of money and get a lot out of it. So the cost is up front, but it's a variable return after. Variable meaning it could go up, it could go down, it could go everywhere, it could go nowhere. You don't know. But the idea is you're playing with that long tail. You're not playing with that launch spike that everybody talks about in products. That's not what matters. What matters is when it settles down and it kind of plateaus into that revenue, and that's what you're depending upon. Because once it settles into that spike, as long as you do a reasonable amount of maintenance on it, it'll stay there. And that's the trick of product revenue, is you either want to bring that tail slowly up over time, or you want to stack other products on top of it to build a business. Or, as I'm offering, supplement that with contracting while you're working on products, because your products can earn you money while you're doing contracting work, because you don't have this direct relationship between the money you make from your product and the effort that you're putting in or the expense that you're putting into this. Long story short, you got to play long ball. Look at the slow con. Don't think about this as a short man's game. Don't think about what can I do in 6 months or what can I do in a year. Don't think about when you're going to quit your job. Just say one day I am when it's ready and I'll know. In fact, you probably won't know when you're ready to quit. You'll need other people like a spouse or a girlfriend to say, or a boyfriend, and to say, oh, yeah, no, you should have done that. You should have done that a long time ago. Play the long game. Don't be so focused on the here and now. So annuities equal assets. And this was that word I said we were going to talk about, assets. Assets establish a hard value for your business. A hard value meaning you can turn around and sell that company or sell an annuity on that company, say, well, if you give me money, I'll pay out over a certain period of time because you have these assets. Assets can be leveraged for financing. This can get you money up front if that's what you're interested in, or you can sell it for money, or it's money to support future ventures. And then finally, it's the basis of a buyout. If you want to say, if the goal of your business or why you're selling a product is to sell to a bigger company, you have to have assets. Now, assets can be a lot of things. We've talked about these product annuities and these revenue, and that's because financial assets are the most universal. People understand financial assets. It's like you pull out a dollar bill, you know how much a dollar bill is worth because it says on the front it's worth $1. But if you have something like IP or manpower or real estate, that's much more variable and you don't know what that's worth. But all of these things are assets that you can use. So what I want you to do is stop thinking about revenue and just acquire assets. Acquire them either through building them or through paying money for them. Cash is king. Do not rely on soft assets. Don't look at, well, the future money, and don't make bets on your company from these soft, unknown things. Make them on past performance. Look at money that you have made or money that you have stored in the bank. A cash-rich company is more powerful and has more leverage for a buyout or for financing than a company that's selling IP or manpower. And that's just the facts. This is as old as company. In fact, there's these crazy words for them. They're quick or liquid assets. And these things are profits, bonds, and stocks. Real estate is considered by some to be a liquid asset, even though it's very hard to make it liquid. But it is considered a hard asset in the sense that it has an established value. So this is how you measure your company when you're looking at these things. You basically take all of your securities, your cash, your receivables, all of these things, and you want to divide it by your current liabilities. Liabilities being, what do you owe to banks? What do you owe to investors? What do you owe to employees, outstanding payroll? And this is your liquidity ratio. And this is what's going to be used when you look at a buyout. And it measures the ability of a company to use its assets to pay off its current liabilities, or extinguish, as the business books say. So that's it. We've talked about growth. We've talked about cash. We've talked about, really what I want you to do is just stop guessing. Just stop trying to figure out, intuit what you need to do, and just measure the performance of your company. It's right in front of you. Pay attention to your growth. You think, well, growth is going to be the long-term game. After I survive for a year, I'll look at growth. No, start looking at growth now. As soon as you have 2 months of revenue, you can start analyzing where it's going. And once you have 3 months of revenue, you have a good enough picture that you can figure out where you're going. And finally, build assets. Stop thinking about revenue. Stop thinking about how much money this future thing can make, and start looking back at the value of what you have. It's probably more than you realize. And so my last thing, because I had to give a dig, I had to get a dig in here. A better business is calling. You just got to let it in. Thank you.